Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode coming up, and today, as usual, joined by Swig and a little bit lighthearted today as we address the Chicago Blackhawks scandal, everything that took place about 4 months ago. If you're new to the show, we dropped an episode talking about the scandal and everything that it entailed at the time. We continued to leak the information as we received it, as we continued on not necessarily breaking, but informing viewers of the story. And a couple of Blackhawks fans that do watch the show said that they got some of that information from our latest episode. So we're looking to go ahead and expand on that as we get more information as this comes along. But before we get into that, Swig, I want to ask, how have you been?
I'm okay, man. This is not a lighthearted episode at all. The entire episode is going to be about this because it needs to be addressed. We said that at the time a few months ago. We weren't the only ones. But it's part of the reason we're having another episode on it now, doing it entirely, an episode entirely on this, is because last week, while I unfortunately was out of town, so we couldn't address it sooner. Last week, the Blackhawks player who was part of this identified himself. I'll get to that in a second. We mentioned previously that the Blackhawks were launching an investigation from an external source, which was Jenner and Block, the lawyers. That report became public last week. The player, what's the word for it? Introduced himself, announced himself, whatever you want to call it. So that's part of the reason we're doing this now. The investigation took multiple months. I want to say a total of 139 people were interviewed as a part of it. Read the entire report. At one point during this, I watched the interview with the player a couple of times, and we will talk about him specifically and identify him and all that. But just wanted to explain. This is why we gave details as often as we could, but there wasn't much to report for the most part while the legal process played out. And now that a lot of it has, it's time to we'll reiterate everything that's happened and go from there.
Yeah, we left off about 4 months ago when we talked about this scandal regarding the Chicago Blackhawks. Latest thing we talked about was that the team was going to go ahead and launch their own private investigation and gather some sources on the information and see where everything was put to where it all came about. So the unidentified player that came out, obviously the scandal of everything that took place with the video coach, Brad Aldrich, who ended up getting his name etched off the Stanley Cup, thankfully. And it was obviously something that should have been done. And I'm glad that he's no longer has his name on the Stanley Cup. But the player on the roster that was unfortunately a victim of this situation was Kyle Beach. He sat down with TSN, the Toronto Sportsnet, Sports Center over there, with Rick Westhead, had a great interview with him, just got a lot of information out. What were your overall thoughts when you saw Kyle Beach?
Well, the first one that I know we both agree with, and we want to make sure that we say up front, is we want to take a moment here and commend and applaud Kyle Beach for his courage and his bravery and telling his whole story like this. I'm sure it was absolute hell for him. I know he mentioned it during the interview how many times he's had to rehash this and talk about it whether it was with teammates or coaches, family, whoever he decided to confide this in, and then when he was being interviewed about this. So I'm sure this, we know for a fact, actually, that this was not easy for him. But we want to take a second and commend him for it and thank him for the bravery and everything. This is important, not just in an NHL perspective or an individual perspective for Kyle, but for so many other, countless other victims of this, whether it's in a hockey context or any other context. It does not matter. That hopefully this will inspire other victims who have unfortunately inexcusably had to deal with this. It'll hopefully give them a little bit more of a platform or a support system to share their stories as well and make sure that they're not alone in all this. And we want to make sure we say that we stand with them, and we're not the only ones. We shouldn't be. Kyle Beach is not alone during any of this, and he had to deal with so much of this by himself for so long, and that was one of the biggest takeaways I had from it. He had to internalize this for 11 years for the most part. There were individuals he would tell. He said Paul Vincent, the skills coach, I believe, was the first one he told. He told his family. I think he said in the interview on TSN once, and then they respected his privacy after that. But various things here and there. He's playing in a German league now, and he made sure to say they had a better system in place. It's just, what else can we take away from it other than it's just as, if not even more fucked up than it seemed to be when the news first came out a few months ago. It's just as horrifying. It's more horrifying. It just, reading the report that the law firm released was just stomach churning. There's no other way to put it, and it amazes me, and it saddens me that of all the people that this was reported to, that so many of them decided that pursuing a Stanley Cup was more important than taking this seriously. And it's just disgusting.
Yeah, not a good look at all. Kyle, well, like you said, I applaud to 100%. Incredible bravery. That's got to be a tough spot for him, regardless of everything that's taken place, to come out and voice your thoughts. I mean, it was John Doe in the record book for quite some time, and he built up the courage to hop on a live hit on a television show with a lot of views in Canada, and he said, "All right, this is my platform. This is the time that I'm going to step up and be the voice to what has all taken place around this scandal." So I tip my hat to Kyle Beach and everything that the courage that he showed in that area. So it was a tough situation, and the Blackhawks organization as a whole, not a good look at all. You mentioned pursuing the Stanley Cup. That was 2010. That was their first run at a Stanley Cup, and there was a lot of things being hidden on this team. We mentioned it in that first episode that we covered the Blackhawks scandal about 4 months ago, where we said there were a lot of things hidden. A lot of players knew about the situation as we were gathering the facts. Now we know a lot of that locker room knew about the situation going in. And some of those players, a couple stepped up and spoke. Brent Sopel, Nick Boynton, a couple that have said that everyone was aware of that in the locker room. What do you think when you hear that?
Well, it's horrifying, but not surprising, I don't think, ultimately, because when the initial leakings of this story were starting to come out, the end of June, early July timeframe, there was one of the articles I read. I believe it was a Rick Westhead TSN piece. If not, I want to. I'm sorry. It was hard to find every single piece of information, but I want to take a second. Thank him specifically, Mark Lazarus, one of the Blackhawks athletic reporters. Those two in particular, that's who I got the most information from when I was reading up on this, that I relayed to you and several other people. And they, as they should have, did not stop persisting, did not stop asking these questions, even during the couple of months where we personally, as people who are not journalists at the moment, didn't have the platform to ask these questions. And for them, when this was not necessarily a big story in the media, or while it was at least cooled down a bit while it was being investigated, they did not stop, and I want to thank them for that. They shouldn't have, and I think they played a big part in some of these facts coming to light, which is extremely important. But at the same time, back then, it was said that this was essentially an open secret in the organization, and it's hard to say exactly how much blame goes to every single figure, whether it's front office member, coach, player. I don't really want to play that game, but anyone who is told about this and didn't report it is, at least to an extent, complicit in allowing it to continue, or not taking it seriously enough during the playoff run. And then obviously, unfortunately, after it happened to Beach, and after the Blackhawks did not discipline him right away, fire him, press charges. It goes a lot deeper than that. But there's the sickening facts that he was allowed to stay with the team and celebrate with the players and have his name on the cup and have his day with the Stanley Cup that he brought to a school with children. And then after his days with the Blackhawks, going to Miami of Ohio and worst of all, going to the high school in Michigan and sexually assaulting a 16-year-old on that team. And the hardest part of the beach video interview that I saw was how him breaking down, saying he was sorry to that teenager at the time. He's in his 20s now, because I believe that happened in 2013. But saying he was sorry that happened to him and that he didn't do enough. And I mean, how do you watch that? It's one of the most powerful and important, but also sickening things I've ever watched, and that it was allowed to get to that point. The fact that it happened to Kyle is horrifying enough, but then the fact that countless people didn't take it seriously or take any appropriate action, and then it continued and happened to more people, is just sickening, man. There's no other way to put it.
There's not. I mean, it's gut wrenching whenever you hear anything about this story. You know, the more details that come out, you're not by any means looking forward to seeing any of them. But the more details that do come out, you get the notification, and your first reaction is, "Oh God, there's more." But not only that is, okay, what does this information say? Does it have any more to the story? And right now, it's to the point where this information being leaked is long term for the NHL, something that can potentially have a spin on how can you get better in areas where you haven't been good at in a long time, or potentially ever in your league history. But also the story is just absolutely gut wrenching, to your point, and it's not a good look. And people from the Chicago Blackhawks organization have been on staff for many years. Stan Bowman being one of them, head coach Joel Quinnville, who eventually we'll get to him in a little bit, but there were a lot of people on staff, not just players, that were on that 2010 team that stuck around for a while. And once the news came out about Beach and everything there, they were eventually let go from the staff, whether they're coaches or in the front office. So, I mean, what do you feel about that, where they finally did end up getting off their job, but they still kept their job for another decade after the incident?
Right. I mean, you can look at those case by case, right? So we can start with the front office. So, at least in my view. So when we talked about this originally, and when we saw the original facts, one thing that I gathered, or maybe it was implied in the articles, but one thing that I at least crossed my mind, however it got there, was when Aldrich, and I don't even want to dignify him by using his name, but when when it came out that he was doing this to a player, or to Beach, that like, one thought that I had was, what kind of player could it have been where he might think that he can get away with this? And from my very, very basic, and I don't want, from a selfish perspective, I don't want to understand it completely. But from my very basic understanding of how these situations can occur, a lot of times these predators will prey on people who don't have the power to fight back from it. And in this case, Beach himself said, after his junior season with the Spokane Chiefs was over, he was initially called up to the Rockford Ice Hogs, the Blackhawks AHL team. And then when their season ended, he was called up as what's called the Black Ace. So essentially a practice body during the playoff run. And that is perfectly normal in itself. Every playoff team will do that. But this is not a player who was on the Blackhawks roster at the time. Even he ended up never playing a game in the NHL. But he was at that time, of course, excited to be called up, and a relatively recent first round pick of the team that I'm sure was in their future plans, but wasn't there yet. And the Aldrich, unfortunately and inexcusably, used that sort of leverage and power to his advantage. And that's a pattern that is unfortunately exists in a lot of these other sexual assault cases. And yeah, that's just incredibly difficult to read. But when you consider the power or leverage dynamic, when it turned out to be Beach, you can look at him and how his NHL career ended up unfolding and say you can at least see where that pattern comes from. Not, and I'm not saying in any way I'm not justifying that, but I think that's where the some of the logic, the extremely fucked up and inexcusable logic from Aldrich came in. Why he thought he might be able to target a player like Beach. That's just speculation from me and gathering or reading up or just putting pieces together of these facts. So that I don't want anyone to interpret that as me trying to justify it, because I'm not. It's there's nothing to justify. It's disgusting. But I believe from reading everything and listening and everything, that's where it came from, where this is why he was targeted specifically in comparison to a player who may have been already established that had more power to keep that from happening. It's disgusting, man. I'm sorry. Just that's all I got there. I gotta.
Yeah. I mean,
here.
I hear you. You know, it's a point that is unfortunately a logical one, where you get the information you've gathered from everything and you see, okay, maybe that's something that Aldrich would find a way to take advantage of, and unfortunately that was the case with Kyle Beach. And first round pick of the team, you mentioned, that was back in 08. He had a great future plans with the team. Obviously, the team thought high of him, took him in the first round. His career ended up going down a path where didn't see a lot of success at the NHL level, but we're not here to talk about on ice. We're sticking here with the off ice situation as we continue to look. I'm curious about Stan Bowman, and I brought up the front office and everything there. Stan Bowman, been with the team a very long time. He was with the team in the Cup run and many Cup runs there, and he obviously just got let go about a few weeks ago after the incident where everything was released. So Stan Bowman no longer a part of this team. What role do you think he had in this sort of situation?
It's tough, man. The most information we have from that is reading the report from Jenner and Block and from Reed Shar and everything. From what I know, and from the facts I read, I guess that's not just me having the common knowledge off the top of my head, but from what I read, I know Bowman was with the organization, I believe, in an assistant GM capacity beginning in 2002. So he was with the organization for about 8 years before these horrifying assaults took place. And then he was one of several figures who so Kyle Beach said that he first reported this to skills coach Paul Vincent, who took it seriously from what Beach said, he went out of his way to thank Vincent for everything that he tried to do. This is not me trying to criticize him at the moment with the facts that we currently have. But then Vincent reported it to several front office figures, none of whom are with the Blackhawks anymore, but 3 of them have been fired in the last 18 months, including Bowman, who was really fired or stepped away, allowed to resign 2 weeks ago, which is pretty weak in some aspects. When Stan Bowman was announced as somebody stepping aside, or whatever phrase he used, I read his statement several times, and it looked to me that he was basically, or it sounded to me that he was passing the buck or passing the blame, shifting it to John McDonough primarily. And he was the one fired about 18 months ago, by the way, but that's a separate issue. But where I was going with that is his statement and several others to me were them trying to pass the blame more to somebody else. And I there might be some credence to it not being entirely one person's fault, or if they did report it to a superior, that they should have taken it further. Like, there might be a little bit of justification to that. These people were still told this information. And of all the people in this room, like, I think John Tortorella said it, and was one of many people to say it. Like, why could one person, including Bowman, not have said, this is sexual assault, this is wrong, if nobody else is going to report it, or if I find out that nobody reported it, I'm going to go do it myself to the police? And I understand that these people all had jobs or titles that I'm sure they wanted to protect, but there are also much more important things happening here. Like this is huge, disgusting, disturbing news that nobody took seriously enough. And that includes Bowman. Now, I'm not trying to necessarily single him out more than anyone else. I'm not trying to do that, but I do think that his relative silence, not reporting it directly, it played a role at least. And maybe he did report it to McDonough or one of his other superiors, if there were any, but that doesn't mean that he did all he could do. And I know that might not be entirely fair, but these people all had the information, and I find it hard to believe. I don't believe that nobody knew that it wasn't reported further until earlier this year.
I'd like to ask you a question, just get your opinion on it real quick. Just a one hitter here. You don't have to spend too much time on it. Do you think that it might have been a situation where he realized how big like I agree 100%. You get this information, you got to leak it. You have to get him off your staff, and everything else that transpires, everyone that knows of the situation should be aware and let go. I'm curious to know, do you think that it could have been a situation where he waited a little bit too long? And if he went back then, it was a little bit like, okay, you're a year out of it, and you're like, oh no, this is still going to potentially cost me my job, and then it sort of gets out of reach where you sort of lose everything, and it's more, all right, maybe they'll forget about it, as awful as it sounds, if you wait a little bit and don't try to leak this information.
It's possible. I'd really prefer not to try to put myself in their shoes.
Right.
From a selfish perspective, I don't have to, because this wasn't reported to me personally, or any of us, obviously. There might be some truth to that extremely flawed logic if that is the case.
Sure.
But so just to put a time frame on it, so everything was reported, I believe, either in the middle of, or right before, or right at the end of the Western Conference Finals that the Blackhawks played during that playoff run against the Sharks. I think they put the date of May 23rd, 24th, something like that, of 2010. And then the Blackhawks obviously won that series, went on to win the Stanley Cup a couple weeks later. And from what I understand, nothing was reported any further until after the Stanley Cup, which would have been sometime in mid-June, roughly 3 weeks later. That in itself is way too late. It should have been reported immediately. It's much more important than winning a Stanley Cup will ever be. And all of these people involved decided that it wasn't at the time. And even if they, let's say, reported it, this became a big story right after the Stanley Cup, or within a month or 6 months or a year instead of a decade, that's still not any more justifiable. It still was allowed to happen. And then the playoff run took the priority over taking sexual assault claims, allegations, facts, however you want to look at it. Now, seriously, that's unforgivable.
Yeah, I agree, man. It's not a good look at all at everything that's taken place here. I want to get two more people to talk about, or one person, and then we can sort of take an overall look at this as we wrap this episode. But I want to talk real quick about Joel Quinnville. He was obviously the head coach of this team for many years. He was there to win all 3 Stanley Cups. Let go early in that season where Jeremy Colleton took over, but. I looked at Lazarus' piece on the Athletic, and his title to Joel Quinnville's one of the articles he wrote was Quinnville's singular obsession with winning came at far too steep a price, and that just tells me. I mean, they said everyone knew in that front office, in the locker room, of everything that transpired with Beach and Aldrich and everything that has happened to this whole scandal situation. The head coach knew that as well. So what do you think whether it's the message to the team or just overall perspective of this whole situation was?
It sounds like he, along with the other members of the front office, was told about this and then prioritized winning over taking that seriously. I don't care what accolades he might have as a coach. They don't matter anymore. They do not, and they never will again. So he didn't take it seriously enough. I believe I read that he didn't want to disrupt team chemistry by reporting it or taking it more seriously, or whatever however you want to take it from there. dude, fuck team chemistry at that point. You need to instead say fuck Brad Aldrich for doing this, or at least say, okay, let's make sure, or let's look into this and see if these allegations have merit. And from what Beach said, the Blackhawks included, and I think Quinnville would have to be included in this, have said the whole time, or said a few months ago when the lawsuit was filed, that his claims did not have merit, which is basically calling him a liar, which is just awful. It's just awful. And I know that a lot of those details are more recent just because of when the lawsuit was filed or when all this was public last week. But this started in 2010, and Quinnville was a part of that, is a part of that. And briefly, and I want to get into the sports psychologist here in a second, because I think he deserves his own shit. But Quinnville, briefly, I don't want to take away the spotlight, the focus from what matters more. But when Quinnville was clearly implicated in all this, and it came out that he was one of the people who was informed of all this, he was allowed to coach one last game for the Florida Panthers, and that just struck me as not only unacceptable, but also just odd, just objectively weird. And I was actually traveling. I was in the Chicago airport connecting for my next flight, just coincidentally, when I saw all of this. That's when I was able to watch the Beach interview for the first time. It's when I saw that Quinnville was given that one last game behind the bench. It's when I saw that I think I saw Bowman was stepping aside a day or two earlier, and Al McIsaac as well. But it just, I find that part of the situation not just as disturbing and disgusting as the rest of it, but also just objectively weird.
Yeah, it was just a weird stance. That's the way to look at it. When you look at Joel Quinnville getting that last game, obviously going to Florida, building up culture there, but the success doesn't mean anything. He might be a good coach, but what he's done, you have to be able to hold everyone accountable to standards and be there for your players. It's an open door policy a lot of coaches have. Being able to talk with your head coach and building a relationship there from a personal level that really hits home, and you can feel trusted around, and not just, hey, you're a good hockey player with good chemistry, hop on this line with him and see where it goes. You have to have that in locker room relationships, player morale, all that stuff. And I think that was an area that Quinnville lacked or just didn't want to address because of his success and winning and all that takes place. But you did want to touch on Dr. James Gary and everything he did with the sports psychologist. So you want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, of course. And I think real quick on Quinnville, I think it's just he didn't have the morals or the guts or the ethics to report on it. He prioritized winning more, and it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to think about him as a coach anymore. I'm going to think of him as somebody who failed to take this seriously, and that's more important than any other achievement he may have had. So, and I want to briefly, when he was first asked about this a few months ago with the Panthers, I thought his reasoning or excuse for saying he didn't know about this was weak then, and it looks even worse now. But as horrible as awful as all of this is, and it's going to be a little bit difficult for us to know exactly how this should have gone up the hierarchy of the organization, like to an extent. But anyone who knew about it didn't say anything awful, right? No doubt on that. But yeah, James Gary, I wanted to mention him specifically because there was something that Kyle Beach said that he did that made me even more sick and angry than anything else. And the whole story is frustrating, infuriating, disgusting. But so James Gary, I believe the sports psychologist you mentioned with the Blackhawks, when he was one of the people in the meeting being told about these allegations by Vincent, and from what I understood or read, or from what Kyle Beach said, James Gary blamed Kyle Beach for this. First of all, just to point out something that I hope is obvious, any victim of any sort of sexual assault, it is not, and it will never be their fault.
Yeah.
And then making, whether he outright said it or implied it or both, making them feel or saying that it is absolutely reprehensible and just makes my blood boil now talking about it. And I think Beach said something like from what Gary told him, that it made him feel like he was in the wrong and that Aldrich was in the right for these actions, which we went over some of those graphic details before, so I'm not going to rehash them. But it's just the fact that not only they don't take this seriously enough in terms of any sort of discipline or criminal charges, but he specifically has the balls, I guess, to make him feel like it was his fault or make him feel inferior or more alone than I'm sure he already did. I mean, holy fuck, man. That is one of the most disgusting and cruel things I have ever heard. And I don't know if anyone else ever said or did the same thing. If they did, they deserve. Yeah, I would say the same thing to them. But no other better way to say it than a fuck you to him and everyone else involved, but especially anyone who would even have the thought, or much less the ability to say it to him, that it was his fault, because that's just disgusting.
And not only is it awful and disgusting, but Kyle Beach is 20 years old when that happened. And I mean, you're still a kid at that point. I know you're an adult, but you got called up to the NHL. You're still learning everything of the game, and you're not even on the roster yet. You mentioned the practice squad player, and just thrown into new territory. He's been on 3 different teams in 3 different leagues and 3 different levels in the matter of months. And he finally gets called up and he gets his chance. He's smiling. He's happy. He wants to be a part of this team. And to have your psychologist say that, I mean, it's absolutely sickening, to your point on that area. So, I mean, it's an awful situation, an awful handling of how everything went. And that also includes on the team. And that's where I want to step in a little bit here, looking at it with Jonathan Taves, the captain of this hockey team. He was 21 years old at the time. And, I mean, he was aware of the information. A lot of people, if not, they said everyone on the team, in the front office, everyone knew about this situation regarding Kyle Beach, Brad Aldrich, and everything that took place there. So Jonathan Taves, a 21-year-old captain of that team, I mean, he was still a rookie, or still learning the NHL, as well as he was trying to go on to win the team's first Stanley Cup. So I don't know how I would feel if I were Jonathan Taves. I'm 21 years old right now. I'd obviously want to report that information, but I don't know what the aspect is. What would you do if you were 21 years old, a captain of the Chicago Blackhawks, and you're Jonathan Taves in that situation?
It's hard for me to know for sure. Like, I'd like to think that I would have reported it right away. I would have said, "Hey, I'm here for you." To if Kyle were to say it to me directly, or if I found out about it, I'd like to think that I would have said, "Hey, I'm here for you. That's completely fucked up, and I'm going to do whatever I can to bring it to justice." But to be completely transparent, I don't know for sure how I would have reacted at 21, or any age, I guess, technically, because I haven't been put in this situation, whether not, and I don't ever want it to happen to me or anyone else. But I haven't been in a situation where either something this horrible happened to me, or that somebody I knew told me about the something this horrible happening. So I don't want to 100% guarantee, I guess, only because I haven't been in the situation. And but I'd like to think that if I were in Tay's shoes, that, or anyone else's shoes that heard about it, that I would have taken it seriously and said something right away and tried to make sure it was taken seriously. But not being put in this admittedly difficult position, it's hard for me to say with 100% certainty. But the part with Tay is that I wanted to focus on more is just his more recent comments. Now that, okay, again, I'm not saying that anyone is responsible for Aldrich's actions besides him. Nothing is worse than what he did, but that still doesn't excuse the thoughts or lack of actions of a lot of other people. In Tay's case, the thing that stuck the most out with me for him was when Bowman stepped aside. I know that he was a big part of bringing him into the organization in the first place. He said something about how well Stan Bowman treated him. Well, that's all well and good, but that doesn't fucking matter, dude. That's not the point. If he didn't treat everyone like that, and if he just treats one person with the lack of respect and attention and care that he did with Beach, it does not matter how he treated everyone else, in my mind. That includes him. Now, I'm not saying it's not a difficult position. I'm not saying I'm envying his position right now, but that doesn't mean that he didn't miss the point with some of what he said.
Yeah, I agree. Not good comments at all from Taser, the captain of the team. I think I mean, there weren't hardly any good comments, and we talked about this off pod. You said Alex DeBrincat might have had the best comments. He was 12 years old at the time, discussing this matter, and just not a good situation at all regarding the Chicago Blackhawks and members of this team, and just the whole. There's a dark cloud surrounding, and this is where I want to ask the fans of the Chicago Blackhawks right now. Where does this story and everything taking place, how does it affect your fandom? Are you still turning on the Blackhawks when they're on? Are you still watching the games? Are you still following the team? Or is this the end all be all where you learned about the situation, everything that you felt was bittersweet of your childhood of winning cup after cup after cup and everything going well, only to find out that there was stuff going behind the scenes of some bad situation that has transpired with people that knew about the situation but did not report it. I'm curious to know, where is your thought process right now? I personally have taken a little bit of a break watching the Chicago Blackhawks. I just want to sit down and process all the information taking place, and just right there, I think the organization as a whole meant so much to me in my childhood and watching the teams and knowing the players and all that good stuff going in. And I mean, that was my winter months. I mean, I would turn on the Blackhawks games and watch them. And right now, it seems like all of that's in the past, and my childhood that I was so excited for and happy for as a little boy is now slanted in a sense where, I mean, everything that I had back then, which was joy, is no longer that joy because I knew what was going on behind the scenes. So that's where I'm at as a fan right now. I don't know if I'll ever get to that point, but right now, I mean, I'm curious to know everyone else as a Blackhawks fans would be, their thought process and where they are mentally as they continue to watch this hockey team or not watch it.
Yeah, I'd be very curious to know that as well. And I want to make sure I say this. Like, I know I personally am not a Chicago Blackhawks fan, and I don't want to imply in any way that any fans or anyone like that are at all responsible or they should feel guilty for enjoying any success they had on the ice. It's
For
not like
sure.
any fan would have any idea of this. But I do think it's fair to ask the fans that are old enough to understand it to at least think about how this could impact them. I think, and I'll say as straightly and as flatly as possible, from a selfish perspective, a very selfish one. There are very few things I'd like to see more as a sports fan than the Rangers winning a Stanley Cup, but I do not want them or any other team to do anything even close to this or do anything morally wrong and cover it up in order to get there. I don't know. I don't ever want to see that with any team, whether I'm a fan of them or not. So I took this seriously. I know it might have been slightly easier selfishly because I'm not a fan of the team to say up front, I don't have to wrestle with that moral quandary, I guess. But I don't want to say either that any Blackhawks fan should feel guilty, but I do challenge them to think about this and just how it impacts them from there. And I wanted to go from there and ask you, I know we talked about this a little, basically, so looking at the NHL or hockey as a whole, I don't think it's just an NHL thing, where the sport goes from here, and not just with how to deal with any sort of sexual assault cases, but other issues that have been clearly outlined and presented and vocalized more in recent months and years. There's a lot of it. Just in the last couple of years, there was Akeem Aliu with some of the racial allegations of Bill Peters, for example, and he said when the NHL promised some sort of investigation into this, which they didn't really take seriously until an outside force came in, and then Akeem Aliu said that I believe he said he had one conversation with him and his agent, and then hasn't heard from them for 2 years, and just this year. So these actions are mostly from 2010, but just this year, I know we talked about this. The Montreal Canadiens with their first round pick. Drafted a player named Logan Malo. I'm sorry if I'm butchering the last name, but right before the NHL draft this year, back I think it was in July this year, um, reports, stories came out that he had a sexual encounter that, as far I believe it was consensual, with a girl of his age. He was 17 at the time, and then he took pictures of that encounter that he shared with friends, family members, whoever. It doesn't matter, and that's completely unacceptable. Now, where I'm going with this is now he said that he came out with something. Don't draft me in this draft. I'm gonna try to improve my character, possibly enter my name into next year's draft. The Canadians not only ignored that, but took him with their first round pick, made him their clear priority. So where I'm going with that is, has the NHL really made any progress with how they have their priorities changed at all, looking at those two situations in the last 11 years? And either way, where does the league go from here to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else ever again?
It has not been good. The whole entire NHL standpoint of looking at anything, whether it's diversity, whether it's sexual orientation, inclusion, whatever you want to say, the NHL has done a shitty job on it, and I'm willing to say that they have not done good at any of that area. And you brought up the Canadians prioritizing Malo in the first round. Not a good look at all. But I'll tell you one thing: after what we saw with Kyle Beach and Brad Aldrich in this whole situation, if this doesn't open up your eyes, I don't know what the hell will. Because this is one of the biggest stories and one of the sickening stories we've seen in the National Hockey League. And Bettman better be dialing up, because his press conference didn't look too sweet. And he's got to find a way to start working towards getting the league better. Because you mentioned it's not only an NHL thing, it's a hockey thing. Just not too long ago, a few months ago, we saw Jalen Schmerich, a defenseman. He was playing overseas. He had a racial encounter where someone peeled a banana, and the player only got a 10-game suspension that could have been reduced to 3. So it was just a horrible look. And this is happening in hockey in all levels, whether it's the East Coast Hockey League, whether it's the NHL overseas, whatever. Hockey has not done a good job at all in inclusion or any factor in that area. So they better step it up big time, because, I mean, like I said, if you can't do it after this Kyle Beach story and everything that's transpired there is no hope for the National Hockey League in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've said before personally, like, I love the sport. Hockey is my favorite sport on ice, but the NHL individually, worst league. And Beach said something in his interview that I encourage everyone to go watch, by the way, if they haven't yet. And I will be happy. I know I retweeted one link to it. I'd be happy to send it to anyone who cares. But he said at one point that, especially before this external investigation came in from Jenner and Brock, I believe, or Reed Shar, that not only were his claims called meritless and basically he's being called a liar, but also, I mean, it not only it wasn't taken seriously, but it's hard for me to even say it. Just the NHL cared more about protecting their name and image than they did about doing what was right for him or protecting their players that make the NHL what it is. I think that's an extremely fair point. No hockey league would exist without its players.
Right.
There are no league of any kind would exist without the players who make to play the game itself. And the NHL cared more about protecting. And I, to a very limited extent, I understand wanting to not damage your brand. But if you're really going to regain any sort of trust, gain any trust in the first place, then you can't just pretend that these bad things never happened. And I think that applies to a lot of things, not just in the sports world. But yeah, there have been a lot of horrible things that have happened just in humanity. Ignoring them and pretending they didn't happen is not the right answer to me. You have to acknowledge them and admit, just in a very basic sense, this was wrong, this was fucked up, this was unacceptable, and these are the steps we're going to take to make sure it never happens again. And I'm skeptical that the NHL is going to take it seriously enough. I've never been a fan of Gary Bettman long before anything like this started becoming more newsworthy or frequently reported would be a better way to phrase it. I'm not a big fan of a lot of things he's done, just looking from an on-ice perspective, but this is way, way worse. And I know that a lot of people, including Beach, I know Brent Sopel had a meeting with Bettman in the commissioner's office today. I hope at the very least that this is all taken seriously and real steps are taken to address it. And I'm skeptical to see that happens. But this needs to be something that's analyzed. We can't just look at this and say, okay, a lot of the facts are public now. This is essentially over. The job has been done. That is not true. This needs to continue to be analyzed and improved for the upcoming days, months, and years and decades to come, and make sure that this doesn't happen again to anyone at any level of sports or just in the general public. And I'm hoping that a league with as much recognition as the NHL has can take it, not only take it seriously, but have a positive influence outside of hockey as well to say, speak up or just improve the process here. Because and I know Beach isn't the only one, but he said just how alone he was during all of this and how it destroyed him from the inside out. And I can only imagine, again, commend him for it. There's nothing I can commend the NHL for. And I really, really hope this is not one that eventually gets swept under the rug too. But for a long time, that's basically what happened. So I have doubts.
Yeah, it's not been good, the track record in the National Hockey League when it comes to tough situations. So hopefully that changes. Like I said, today we just covered the Kyle Beach situation, the Chicago Blackhawks scandal, and if there's any more information that comes out, we will definitely be keeping you updated. But that's going to wrap for today. So make sure that you continue to stay right here and continue looking at the whole situation regarding Kyle Beach.
Yeah, and there was one other thing I wanted to say. Yeah, like a lot of times at the end of an episode, we'll say yeah, the normal stuff of like it, leave a review, and subscribe, and all that. And what I wanted to say personally at the end of the episode instead. So first of all, listen to all this, share it with anyone you know who might have had some sort of similar experience, or they don't need to be sports fans to listen to this episode,
Right.
or read up on the situation. They don't need to get our takes on it specifically. We'd like them to from a selfish perspective, but I'd like it more for these people to read up on this situation and see how somebody who you might consider so powerful, physically or athletically, could have this happen, and then how it could impact so many more everyday people. It does unfortunately impact so many more everyday people. Encourage you to share it with as many people as possible. And I would also want anyone who might have been impacted by this in any way, if there's something that we left out, and I know that we wouldn't do that intentionally, we didn't do it intentionally, if there was something we missed, but if there are more important points that you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, or talk about, or anything like that, please message one of us individually, or leave a comment saying something like that, rather than whatever your thoughts are on us as a whole. Just I know that we did our best to and we're going to continue doing our best to report this as much as possible and as honestly and detailed as possible. But if there is anything we missed, please tell us. We don't do that intentionally, and we want to make sure that we don't just take this specific Kyle Beach situation seriously, which we do, but also that if we were to hear of anything else of the kind, that we would treat it with the same kind of care.
Couldn't have said it better myself, man. That's true. No truer words have been spoken there. Just feel for anyone that has gone through any of that stuff, and feel free to reach out, like Swig said, and just be sure to let us know if there's anything we missed, or anything any topics or discussions that you thought that should have been had. And please continue to check us out. If you want to realize, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube. So leave a like, leave a subscribe, but most importantly, go ahead and leave a comment so we can get your take on the episode. Very, very heartfelt stuff today. Not necessarily the more uplifting ones, but hopefully we will be able to get back to that next week. The Bulls have been rolling. Best team in the Eastern Conference right now. We might talk a little bit basketball, some NFL going on as well, along with the NHL on ice. So stay tuned to the Big City Sports Podcast. We'll keep you updated on that front. But that's going to do it for today. I appreciate everyone that tuned in. And until next time, it's the Big City Sports Podcast.